Zira sat quietly in the room, the soft hum of the ship around her. Her people, the Valari, valued calmness, logic, and control. Everything in her world was planned, calculated, and precise. That was how her people lived. They didn't need chaos or wild emotions. But today, Zira felt something she wasn't used to: fear. The Valari were a peaceful species, and the idea of reproduction was always a serious matter. It was not like other species that made choices based on love or attraction. For Zira and her people, it was about harmony, mental and physical compatibility. The Council of Elders had chosen her for this mission because she was of age, and because she had been selected for the bonding ritual, a sacred event in which Valari, individuals joined with a mate from another species to create an offspring that would unite their cultures. But Zira dreaded it. She had seen how the human males were. It was wild, emotional, and unpredictable. The humans had a reputation for their wild instincts and impulses, especially their warriors. They didn't think things through. They acted, and Zira was sure she would never be able to bond with someone like that. Her elders had assured her that it was for the good of the Valari, that their peaceful nature could benefit from the strength and passion of humans. Zira had heard of humans. They were different from her people. They lived in chaos, driven by their emotions and feelings. The idea of being bonded with one of them was terrifying to Zira. She sat in silence, staring at the wall, trying to calm her thoughts. She wanted to back out, but there was no way. The council had already chosen. The bond was not just important for her, it was important for her people. There was no escaping it. Zira's thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of her communicator. It was time. The human soldier Ethan was waiting for her outside. She stood slowly, her heart racing in her chest. There was no going back now. She walked to the door, and with a deep breath, she stepped out. Ethan was standing there, tall and broad-shouldered. His face was hard, like most of the soldiers she had heard of, but there was a softness in his eyes that Zira didn't expect. She stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to say or do. Ethan was everything she feared. He had dark brown hair, cut short, and his eyes were a sharp blue, full of life. He wore a military uniform, the kind Zira had seen in reports, and his posture was relaxed. There was no tension in him, unlike the stiffness of the Valari. "Zira," he said, his voice calm but with an underlying warmth. "You're ready?" Zira hesitated, her fingers twitching at her sides. She had been trained to meet strangers, even warriors, but nothing in her training could prepare her for this moment. Ethan's presence made her feel small, nervous, and out of place. She could feel the rush of emotions, her usual control slipping away. "I am ready," Zira replied, her voice more distant than she intended. She could feel the weight of her words. She had to be strong, even though everything inside her screamed. To turn around and leave? Ethan smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. There was something in his expression, something that seemed to acknowledge the tension between them. He wasn't sure how to talk to her, but he knew one thing. For certain, Zira was not what he expected. "I've heard a lot about you, Zira," he said slowly. "Your people are ... different." Zira's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Ethan shrugged. "You all seem so calm, controlled. I've never met anyone like you before." Zira felt the need to explain, but instead she remained silent. She didn't want to talk about her people's ways or her fears. Ethan didn't understand her people. How could he? Humans lived in the chaos they created. They were unpredictable. That's what made them dangerous. "I suppose it's the same for me," Ethan continued, his voice carrying a hint of a smile. "I've never met anyone quite like you, my people. We don't exactly follow rules. We live off impulse sometimes. It's hard for us to understand your ... restraint." Zira looked at him, taking in his words. She could feel her pulse quicken. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. How could she bond with someone so different? How could her people expect her to be with him, a wild man? Her heart raced as she forced herself to take another step forward. "We will see," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "But I do not know how I will work with you." Ethan's expression softened, as if he understood her struggle. He held out his hand, a gesture Zero didn't quite expect. She didn't want to take it, but she had no choice. She needed to show that she could be civil. Her elders would be watching, judging her every move. Zira stared at his hand for a long moment. The tension between them was thick. Finally, with a small breath, she placed her hand in his. It was warm, rough from years of hard work and training. Her fingers brushed against his, and for a brief moment, she felt a flicker of something that she couldn't explain. It wasn't fear, it wasn't discomfort, it was something new. Ethan's grip tightened slightly, as if sensing her hesitation. "You don't have to be afraid, Zira," he said gently. "I'm not here to harm you. We just need to make this work, together." Zira couldn't respond. Instead, she nodded, knowing the truth of the situation. They had to work together, even if it was the last thing she wanted. As they walked down the corridor, Zira couldn't shake the feeling that her world was about to change in ways she couldn't control. She didn't want it to happen, but it was happening. The thought of bonding with Ethan, a human warrior, filled her with dread. She had no idea what the future would hold or how she would ever accept someone so different from her. But as the doors opened before them, Zero couldn't help but wonder. Maybe there was more to Ethan than she could see. Maybe she would find the answers she needed in the wildness she feared so much. Zira and Ethan walked through the long, metallic hallways of the ship. The cold, sterile walls seemed to stretch forever, but for Zira, it felt like the walls were closing in on her. Mind raced with thoughts she couldn't quiet. The fear she had felt earlier was still there now, joined by an unsettling curiosity. Ethan walked beside her, his footsteps heavy but steady. He wasn't looking at her, but Zira could feel his presence. She had been around many beings before, but no one like him. His movements were so ... alive, uncontrolled, like the storm she had read about in her studies. In a way, it scared her. How could anyone be so ... free? As they reached the observation deck, Ethan turned to her with a slight smile. "I know this might be weird for you." "For me too, to be honest," he said, his voice calm but with a hint of nervousness. "But I think we can make it through. We just need to figure out how to work together, right?" Zira didn't respond immediately. She wasn't sure what to say. The idea of working together with him seemed impossible. He was everything she had been taught to avoid. His unpredictability, his loudness, his raw emotion, it was all so foreign to her. They stood by the large window looking out at the stars. The view was breathtaking. Zira had seen it many times before, but today, it felt different. The stars seemed to mock her, so far away and unreachable, just like her feelings. "I think we should get to know each other," Ethan said, breaking the silence. He glanced at her, his eyes serious. "I want to know what makes you tick, Zira." "What makes you? Well, you?" Zira turned to look at him, startled by the directness of his words. She wasn't used to being asked about her thoughts, her feelings. Her people valued quiet intelligence, not raw emotion. She wasn't even sure how to answer. I don't think there's much to know," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "I am who I am because I've been trained to be this way. My people... We do not let emotions control us. Everything is ... calculated," Ethan raised. An eyebrow calculated. That doesn't sound like much fun. Zira felt her cheeks warm slightly, though she didn't know why. She had never had trouble with control before, but something about Ethan's openness made her feel vulnerable. "We do not need fun," she said, her voice steady. "We need purpose. Everything has a reason. Even our bond is a reason for unity, not pleasure." Ethan nodded slowly, but his expression softened. "I get it, but don't you ever want more than that? I mean, don't you ever feel like you want to do something just because it feels right?" Zero paused, unsure of how to answer. She had never allowed herself to think that way. It was too dangerous, too risky. If she let her emotions guide her, she could lose control. She might make a mistake. "I don't know how to feel that way," she said, her voice quiet. Ethan smiled a little. "Maybe you don't need to know right now. But just so you know, I'm not asking for anything from you. I'm just here to help. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do." Zero looked at him, surprised. She had expected him to push, to demand more, but he hadn't. He was simply offering his support. It made her feel uncomfortable in a way she couldn't explain. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan shrugged. "Yes," his smile never fading. "It's no problem. We're in this together. We have to be." Zero turned away, looking back out at the stars. She didn't know what was happening between them. All she knew was that the more time she spent with Ethan, the more confusing it became. He wasn't like other humans she had heard about. It wasn't wild or reckless in the way she had expected. There was something about him, something that made her want to understand him more. For the first time, Zira found herself wondering if there was more to the bond than just the duty to her people. Could it be possible that something more meaningful could come from it? She pushed the thought aside quickly, refusing to entertain it. She couldn't afford to think that way. She couldn't let herself feel anything for him. Not yet. Not ever. They stood in silence for a while, watching the stars. The quiet was comforting, but Zira felt a strange sensation building in her chest. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't excitement. It was something new, something she had never experienced before. Ethan broke the silence. "You know, I've met a lot of people in my life, but I've never met anyone like you. Your single quotes re ... different. I don't know what it is, but there's something about you that makes me want to get to know you." Startled. "Why?" He shrugged, looking down at the floor. "I don't know. Maybe it's your calmness, your strength. Or maybe it's just because you don't seem to care what anyone thinks. I respect that." Zira blinked, unsure of how to respond. She had never thought of herself as strong. She had always believed her strength came from control, from keeping everything inside. But Ethan saw something different. He saw something she didn't even know existed. Before she could say anything, the ship's intercom crackled to life. "Zira, Ethan, report to the bridge. It's time." Zira's heart skipped a beat. The moment of truth was coming. She couldn't avoid it any longer. Ethan turned to her, a serious look on his face. "Are you ready?" Zira nodded, though she didn't feel ready at all. As they walked towards the bridge, Zira couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to step into the unknown, and that maybe, just maybe, Ethan was leading her there. The days passed slowly after their first meeting. Zira found herself spending more and more time with Ethan. At first, it was all part of the plan. They were supposed to get to know each other, understand the bond they were meant to form. As time went on, Zira began to feel something she had not expected, a strange pull toward Ethan. She had spent her entire life focused on control. Her people had taught her to suppress her feelings, to think with logic and reason. Emotions were distractions, they said. But Ethan was different. He didn't hide his emotions. He let them flow freely, and at first, Zira found that chaotic. But now she saw something else. Beneath his wild exterior, there was a depth to him that Zira couldn't ignore. They often trained together, working on different exercises designed to help them learn to cooperate. Zira was used to precision and control, but Ethan's approach was more spontaneous. He was quick to act, making decisions in the heat of the moment. While Zira carefully planned every move in advance, one afternoon, they were practicing a drill in the training room. Ethan had asked Zira to spar with him, and at first, she had hesitated. The idea of physical contact was uncomfortable for her. But there was something about Ethan's challenge that made her want to try. "You're afraid, aren't you?" Ethan teased, his smile playful. "I'm not afraid," Zira replied sharply, her voice steady. "I'm just being cautious." But as they began, Zira realized that her cautious approach wasn't working. Ethan moved too quickly, too unpredictably. She couldn't keep up with him. He dodged her every move, making it look effortless. For a moment, frustration bubbled up inside her. She wanted to control the situation, to have the upper hand. But she couldn't. But then something surprising happened. As she reached for him again, trying to get him in a hold, Ethan's hand brushed against hers. His touch was warm and strong, and for the first time, Zira didn't pull away. Instead, she held his hand for a brief moment, feeling a strange sensation course through her. It was unlike anything she had felt before. Ethan paused, noticing the change in her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer now. Zira didn't know how to answer. She had never allowed herself to feel this way before. She had always kept her emotions locked inside, believing that was the only way to survive. But with Ethan, she couldn't seem to control herself. I don't know," she said, looking away. "You're different." Ethan smiled. "You're not so bad yourself, Zira. You just need to trust yourself a little more." Zira's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding back until that moment. Ethan wasn't like anyone she had met before. He wasn't perfect, but there was something about his openness that made her feel safe. She didn't have to hide from him. As they continued to spar, something shifted between them. Zira began to move more freely, her body reacting to the rhythm of the fight without overthinking every step. She wasn't sure if it was the connection they had or the trust that was growing between them, but for the first time in a long time, Zira felt like she could just be herself. After the training, they sat down together, both breathing heavily from the workout. Zira wiped the sweat from her brow, feeling exhausted but strangely content. Ethan was sitting across from her, grinning like he had just won a battle. "See?" he said, his voice light. "You did great. You just need to trust yourself more." Zira couldn't help but smile. It was strange, but in that moment, she felt like Ethan understood her in a way no one else ever had. He didn't judge her for her quiet nature, and he didn't try to push her into something she wasn't ready for. He simply accepted her as she was. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking. Zira found herself opening up to Ethan more than she had ever expected. She told him about her life back home, about the Volari way of thinking and living, how her people valued peace and stability above all else, how emotions were seen as weaknesses. Ethan listened carefully, never interrupting. When she was finished, he looked at her with a serious expression. "I get it. I really do," he said. "But Zira, you don't have to live like that forever. You don't have to hide your feelings just to be strong. It's okay to let go sometimes." Zira wasn't sure how to respond. She had never allowed herself to think that way, but hearing Ethan say it made something inside her stir. Maybe he was right. Maybe she didn't have to hide all the time. Maybe there was room for both control and freedom in her life. As the days passed, Zira found herself spending more time with Ethan. Their connection grew stronger, though Zira wasn't sure what to make of it. She had always believed that the bond she would form with a mate would be a calm, logical one. But with Ethan, it was anything but calm. It was unpredictable, sometimes confusing, but also exhilarating in ways she couldn't explain. One evening, as they sat watching the stars from the observation deck, Ethan turned to her with a thoughtful look. "You know, I never thought I'd be here, talking to you like this. When I first met you, I thought you'd never want anything to do with me." Zira looked at him, surprised by his words. "Why would you think that?" Ethan shrugged, his expression honest, "'Cause you seemed so ... distant, so focused on being in control. I didn't think I could break through that wall." Zira felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. I didn't know how to trust you," she admitted quietly, "but now, I don't know. Things feel different." Ethan smiled, his eyes soft. "Yeah, they do." In that moment, Zira realized something she hadn't fully understood before. She wasn't just bonding with Ethan out of duty or expectation. There was something real between them. It wasn't just about the ritual. It was about two people learning to trust each other, to see each other for who they really were. Zira didn't know where this journey would take them, but for the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could embrace the future with Ethan by her side. The mission they had been sent on was difficult and dangerous. Zira had always known that the bond she would form with Ethan would not be easy, but she never imagined how quickly it would be tested. Their task was to help defend a strategic outpost that had been under attack by an unknown alien force. They would need to work together to ensure the outpost's safety, and in doing so, they would have to put their trust in each other completely. As they prepared for the mission, Zira felt a sense of unease. She had trained for situations like this many times, but she had never faced a challenge like the one she was about to take on. Ethan, however, seemed different. He was calm, despite the chaos around them, and Zero couldn't help but admire his composure. They stood together in the briefing room, listening as their commander gave the final instructions. Zero felt her heartbeat quicken. There was so much at stake, and it all depended on her ability to trust Ethan. Remember, their commander said, "You two are a team. Work together, watch each other's backs, and trust one another." Zero glanced at Ethan, and for a moment, their eyes locked. She saw a flicker of understanding in his gaze, a silent promise that he would have her back. She couldn't help but feel a little reassured by that look. As they made their way to the transport ship, Zera's mind raced. The situation they were about to face was unfamiliar, and the danger was real. She knew she had to trust Ethan, there was no other choice. But the fear of the unknown still lingered in her chest. The transport ship lifted off, and they were soon heading toward the outpost. Zera could feel the tension in the air. Every minute that passed brought them closer to the unknown enemy. As they landed, the scene was chaotic. The outpost was under heavy fire, and there was no time to waste. Zera and Ethan quickly donned their armor and rushed toward the defensive line. Her soldiers were already engaged in battle. "Stay close," Ethan said, his voice steady, but with a hint of urgency. "We'll make it through this." Zera nodded, trying to steady her breath. This was it. There was no time for hesitation. They had to work together, or the mission would fail. The sound of blaster fire echoed around them as they moved forward. Taking cover behind a supply crate, Zera's mind was sharp, but her body was tense. She had trained for moments like this, but this was real. The stakes were higher, and her heart raced with the weight of it all. "Ethan," Zera called, her voice rising above the noise. "Cover me." Without waiting for a response, she moved forward, scanning the area for the enemy. Her senses were heightened, and every movement felt like it had to be perfect. She was no longer thinking about the bond they had formed or how different Ethan was from her. There was no time for that. She was thinking only of the mission and the people they needed to protect. From behind her, she heard the sound of Ethan's gunfire. He had her covered just like he promised. Zera's heart swelled with a strange sense of pride. Despite their differences, despite the fears she had when they first met, they were working together. She trusted him. Zera moved into position, taking down the enemy with precision. She had trained her whole life for this, and it showed. Her shots were clean, controlled, and efficient. But even with her skills, she couldn't do it alone. She relied on Ethan, and in that moment, she knew that without him, she wouldn't have made it this far. As they advanced through the outpost, they encountered more resistance. The enemy was relentless, but Zera and Ethan fought side by side. A perfect team. There was no time for hesitation, no time for doubt. They moved as one, covering each other, anticipating each other's moves. It wasn't long before they reached the central command center, where the enemy's leader was believed to be hiding. Zera's heart pounded in her chest as they approached. The final showdown. This would be the moment that determined their success. "We need to breach the door," Ethan said, his voice low but steady. "You ready?" Zera took a deep breath, her pulse quickening. She didn't have a choice. She had to be ready. "Let's do it." Together they forced the door open and charged inside. The enemy leader was there, armed and ready to fight. But Zera and Ethan were faster, more prepared. In seconds, the enemy was neutralized. The mission was a success, but Zera didn't feel the relief she had expected. Instead, she was filled with something else, a strange sense of connection. Had done it. They had done it together. As they walked back to the transport ship, Ethan glanced over at Zera. "You did great," he said, his voice warm with appreciation. Zera nodded, though she didn't feel like saying anything. The adrenaline was still rushing through her veins, and her mind was racing. She had trusted him, and he had proven himself to be someone she could rely on. For the first time, she realized that she wasn't just fighting beside him, she was fighting for him. As they boarded the ship and prepared to leave the outpost behind, Zera couldn't help but feel a shift inside her. She had gone into the mission with doubts, with fears. But now, she understood something she hadn't before. Trust wasn't just about relying on someone else. It was about letting go of the need for control and accepting that there was strength in vulnerability. For the first time, Zira allowed herself to feel the bond that had formed between her and Ethan. It was not just a duty anymore. It was something real, something she could trust. As the ship took off, Zira looked at Ethan and gave him a small, genuine smile. "We make a good team," Ethan smiled back, his eyes sparkling. "Yeah, we do." Zira didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it with Ethan by her side. The days after the mission were quiet, but Zira couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The battle had been intense, and despite the adrenaline and the danger, she felt something she had never expected. A sense of peace. It was not something she could explain. Ethan had been beside her the whole time, just as he had promised, and she realized that trusting him had made all the difference. Zira had always believed that her bond with a mate would be built on duty. The people of her species valued purpose above all else, and emotions were something to be controlled, not expressed. But now, with Ethan, things were different. They had fought together, survived together, and in the process, she'd started to see him in a way she'd never imagined. One evening, they were sitting together in the observation deck, looking out at the stars. The ship was quiet, and the world outside seemed distant, almost unreachable. Zira's thoughts were far from peaceful, however. She could still hear the sounds of the battle echoing in her mind, the rush of fear and triumph all mixed together. But more than that, she found herself thinking about Ethan, his actions, his words, and how he had been there when she needed him most. "Zira," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "Gosh." His voice was softer than usual, and Zira looked over at him. Meeting his gaze, there was something in his eyes, something that made her heart race. "I need to talk to you about something." Zira sat up a little straighter, sensing that this was important. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady, though she felt her stomach twist with nervous anticipation. Ethan took a deep breath before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened between us, the bond we're supposed to form. I know it's not easy for either of us. But I also know something now." He paused, looking at her with a serious expression. "I think what we've been through isn't just about the mission. It's about us." Zira's heart skipped a beat. She had known that things between them were changing, but hearing him say it out loud made it all feel so real. She swallowed, unsure of how to respond. I don't understand." Ethan smiled gently, as if he had expected this response. "I think you do, Zira. You've been holding back, I can see it. You're afraid to trust me, to trust what's happening between us. But the truth is, I don't think we're just partners in a mission anymore. I think there's something more to this. Something real." Zira felt her chest tighten. She had known it, felt it deep inside her, but hearing it from Ethan made it all the more terrifying. The bond she had dreaded was starting to feel like something she wanted, even though it went against everything she had been taught. "I'm not afraid," Zira said quietly, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. "I've just never felt this way before. I was raised to control everything, to keep my emotions in check. I don't know what to do with all of this." Ethan leaned forward, his expression softening. "You don't have to do anything. Not right now. I'm not asking you to change, Zira. I'm just asking you to accept what's happening. We've been through so much together, and I think we're stronger because of it. I believe in us." Zira felt a wave of emotion she couldn't explain. Her mind was still reeling from the battle, from everything that had happened since they met. But there, in the quiet of the ship, with Ethan looking at her with so much understanding, she finally allowed herself to feel something she had been hiding for so long. Hope, for the first time. She saw him not just as a human soldier, not just as someone she was forced to bond with. She saw Ethan as a person she cared about, someone who had proven himself to be more than she could have ever imagined. "I don't know if I'm ready," Zira said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I want to understand. Want to know what this is between us." Ethan nodded, a look of relief washing over his face. "That's all I'm asking for, Zira. We'll take it one step at a time. You don't have to have all the answers now. Zira nodded slowly, her mind still processing everything. There were so many things she didn't know, so many questions that remained unanswered. But in that moment, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt before, hope for the future, as they sat together. The stars outside the ship shining brightly, Zira allowed herself to relax for the first time in a long while. She had always been so focused on control, so focused on doing what was expected of her. But maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than following the rules. Maybe there was room for something new, something unexpected. And maybe, just maybe, that something was Ethan. For the first time, Zira felt a sense of peace. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know what the future would hold. But she was ready to take the next step, whatever it was. "Thank you," Zira said. Quietly, her voice filled with sincerity. "For being patient with me, for not pushing me." Ethan smiled softly. "You don't have to thank me, Zira. We're in this together. We'll figure it out together." And for the first time, Zira believed him. As they sat in silence, Zira felt a shift inside her. She wasn't just dreading the future anymore. She was looking forward to it, with Ethan by her side. She knew they could face anything that came their way. The bond that had once terrified her was no longer something to fear, it was something to embrace. Zira stood at the edge of the observation deck, watching as the stars streaked by. The quiet hum of the ship filled the background, but her thoughts were far away, lost in the memories of the past few weeks. Everything had changed since she met Ethan. The journey she had been so afraid of had transformed into something unexpected, something she wasn't ready to admit but couldn't deny any longer. She had grown. She had learned to trust, and perhaps most surprising of all, she had learned to feel. Zero. The sound of Ethan's voice snapped her back to the present. She turned, her heart skipping a beat when she saw him standing. There, his face was calm, but his eyes held something deeper, something that spoke of understanding and quiet affection. There was no fear between them now, no hesitation. What had started as a reluctant partnership had grown into something much stronger, a bond. "Ethan," Zira replied, her voice soft but steady. She smiled, the first real smile she had allowed herself in a long time. "I didn't hear you." "Come in." Ethan stepped closer, standing beside her and looking out at the stars as well. "You've been quiet lately," he said, thinking about something. Zira took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "Everything. I've been thinking about everything." Ethan glanced at her, his expression understanding. And Zira's heart pounded as she turned to face him fully. She had never been good at expressing her feelings. She had spent her life hiding behind control, hiding behind the walls she had built around herself. But now, standing here with Ethan, those walls didn't seem as important. They felt unnecessary. She was ready to be open, ready to take a step. She never thought she'd take. "I never imagined that things would turn out this way," she said softly. "When we first met, I was afraid. I thought you would be just like the others, loud, reckless, out of control. Thought I would never be able to work with you, let alone trust you. But I was wrong." Ethan raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "You were." Zira nodded, her eyes meeting his. "Yes, you showed me something I didn't expect. You showed me that it's okay to feel. It's okay to trust someone, to let go a little. I thought I had to control everything, my emotions, my actions, even the bond we're supposed to form. But now, I see that I don't have to do it alone." Ethan smiled, his eyes softening. "I'm glad to hear that. I've always known that you're strong, Zira, but you don't have to be strong all the time. It's okay to lean on someone else." Zira looked down at the floor for a moment, letting his words sink in. She had spent so much time thinking. She had to carry everything on her shoulders. But Ethan was right. It wasn't about strength in the way she had always understood it. Strength was also about knowing when to trust, when to accept help, when to allow someone in. "I never thought I could be like this," Zira said quietly. "I thought that by keeping everything controlled, I was protecting myself. But instead, I've been holding myself back." Ethan reached out and gently touched her arm, his warmth grounding her. "You don't have to hold back anymore. I'm not going anywhere." Zira's heart fluttered at his words. She wasn't used to hearing such things. In her world, relationships were based on duty, on what was expected. But with Ethan, it was different. He wasn't asking her to be anything she wasn't. He was simply offering her the freedom to be herself. "Do you think? You think we can make this work?" Zira asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. Ethan smiled, and there was no hesitation in his response. "I know we can. We've already made it this far, haven't we?" Zira looked up at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I guess we have." The weight in her chest, the unease that had followed her since their first meeting, began to lift. She no longer felt trapped by expectations or fear. She felt a sense of clarity, a new understanding of what it meant to be with someone, not out of duty or obligation, but because they truly cared about each other. "I'm ready," Zira said, her voice stronger now. "I'm ready to take this next step. Whatever it is." Ethan's eyes brightened, and his smile widened. "I'm glad you're ready, because I think we're about to start something really amazing, Zira." Together, Zira felt a rush of warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just the promise of what could be. It was the reality that had already begun to unfold between them. A bond that was no longer about obligation, but about choice, about trust, about love. As the ship continued its journey through the vast expanse of space, Zira and Ethan stood, side by side, ready to face whatever the future held. They didn't know exactly where their path would lead, but for the first time, Zira wasn't afraid. She wasn't alone. She had Ethan by her side, and together they would navigate the unknown. Not as two separate beings, but as partners. As equals, Zira's heart felt light, free from the fear that had once ruled her life. She was ready to embrace the unknown, ready to embrace the future. And whatever that future held, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't facing it alone. Ethan smiled at her, his voice filled with warmth. "Let's see where this journey takes us, Zira." And for the first time, Zira didn't hesitate. She took his hand, and together they walked forward into the vast, endless stars.